right, folks, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to Karate Without Belts. I'm John, and I am joined by the illustrious Larry.
Good morning, evening,
Yeah, well,
whatever's applicable.
It's about 10:18 p.m. for me. So I'm kind of spoon manning a little bit. But I know it's early morning for you. I guess not super early, but...
No, not at all. No, and I'm an early riser. I've been up for a couple of hours already.
Shout out to the early risers. I was up at 4:30 this morning. I don't know what people are doing at that time of day. If you're not up and working at that time of day, you're wasting half the day.
Yeah, I tell myself I'll be more constructive when I get up that early, but I never do. I get on Facebook and wind up going down some internet rabbit hole. So.
Oh, I hope everybody who's listening to this podcast has gone down the right rabbit hole.
Yes.
Right before we get started here, real quick, everybody, thank you for those who have donated to the Sherry Joe Castle Fund. Please find that in the description below. Thank you to everybody who is listening, liking, subscribing, all that fun stuff. Appreciate that. That helps us out a lot. So there, I have finished my obligatory YouTube plugs, so we can now officially continue going on with the podcast. So, Larry, what's great about having you on the podcast is that there is no spotlight I'm trying to shine on that's attempting to interview somebody to help promote something, or attempting to being this is the thing we're going to talk about with this well-experted professional about X, Y, and Z. Because I'm no professional in X, Y, and Z. But you're certainly a professional in a lot of X and a lot of Y and a lot of Z. But I don't think a lot of people might not necessarily know that about you.
Okay. It's when you first asked me to be on the show, I was kind of like, it's, I'm not, if I walk down the street, somebody wouldn't stop me and say, hey, you're Larry, the master of the martial arts. Can I have your autograph? So I wasn't sure where we were going to go with this, but it certainly is, it certainly is something I can share with everybody as far as what my experience over I say 35 years of martial arts. Well, it was 7 years of martial arts and then a 30-year break, and now I'm back. So,
well, and I think that's to kind of give a little context to our conversation. Is what was it? Probably this feels longer, but it was only I was looking at the calendar today because I keep calendars around. I guess that's a thing people do. I don't, but certainly I guess members of the Supreme Court do. So the only one I'm going to do today. And I was that was only a year ago. We were at the same seminar.
Yeah, a year and a half. Yeah, it is. Yeah. And I had never met you before. So
yes. So unfortunately, I'm one of those people because I may or may not have been born before you started martial arts training. The interesting thing about you when we first met was you just were like, "Hey, I'm Larry. We're training." The end, and off we were, just crossing Joe,
right,
and getting down to it. And we were training at a little. I guess I want to say it was kind of a weird hybrid camp of modern arnis on one end and Kobudo on the other.
Right.
And you had mentioned, I trained with the guy who was putting on the seminar we were at. I was like, oh, really? And he's like, yeah, but we trained long time ago. And I'd been out for a while, and I just came back. And I'm like, huh, wow. But you still had the same kind of, it looked like you hadn't really left. It looked like you kind of settled into kind of what was going on. And you had just jumped on training with some other people who I'd actually recently gotten to know as well. And so, I thought when we got to talking and or consuming, I don't know, what was that bottle that mutual friend of ours had?
I don't remember it was some kind of scotch. I remember that, but I don't remember the label.
And it was slowly consumed over 3 days.
Yes.
We might not necessarily remember what techniques we were working on, or what we were drinking.
Well, No, alcohol and training didn't mix. They were separate. I remember that part.
Yes, well, thankful. That's that's the way to keep it.
Yes.
I I was thinking back to another thing entirely, but it was like, yeah, I had done that a little bit in younger years, and that was not a smart move.
Hmm. Yeah,
But
I hear some of the stories. But
well,
anyway,
yeah, well, and other stories. But no, what had interested me, because you're not the only one who has this experience.
right.
Uh, you have been trained with somebody who has more or less similar story to a degree, right?
Hmm. Right.
And Hilly's going to be mad that I didn't get him on the podcast, but you know what? He didn't ask. So what's interesting is that this is a group of people who are kind of at large in our society, to a
Hmm.
degree, and largely in kind of what you were talking about with me before the podcast is that there's martial arts and there's the time in people's lives where people get into a hard amount of training, and then there's kind of everything else in life.
Right.
And I think your story has a lot to do with that. I'd like if you would to kind of bring us back to kind of when you first started martial arts and kind of what had first kind of triggered your desire to start training in the first place.
Yeah, I mean it's, wind the clock back. And it was the my first exposure to the martial arts was oddly enough my freshman year in college. It was a small liberal arts school, and they had a mandatory. You had to take some sort of physical education class, and they offered judo of all things. There was a local teacher. I mean, he wasn't a professor. One of the professors was a brown belt in his dojo. So I did a semester of judo, did a little bit beyond that. Unfortunately, transferred away from that school at the end of my first year, but just kind of was like, well, I like the physical activity. I like the structure of respect and formality around being in a dojo. The deference to the senior students, the bowing to each other before and after any sort of interaction, bowing to, step onto the mat, bowing to step off. It just, I don't know, something about that has always appealed to me. And so I dabbled around in some other, picked up some, ad hoc karate, jujitsu, etc. until I finished college. When I left college, I wound up working in a small town just outside of Wichita, Kansas, and there was a gentleman there who ran a dojo under Master. I say Master Oyata. Everybody says Taika now. That wasn't really in use when I started.
I
Yeah.
say Oyata Sensei, but I don't want to I don't want to date you too much. But what year would you say this was?
That would have been 1982.
Okay, so this is getting into almost peak Oyata era. Um,
Yes, yes. I think it was, things were starting to, there was a lot of attention. I mean, I certainly, when the first couple of sessions with this dojo, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I think anybody who gets introduced um, and gains the passion and respect, the enthusiasm for Oyata karate, um, is just like, wow, this is like several levels above what most people, your typical, what you'd expect from a martial arts dojo, and work through that. And I was lucky for many years because it was, I think it was only about 6 months later, and I moved to another small town in Texas. But there were two different dojos within, I don't know, 30, 45-minute drive, which out there in the Midwest is nothing,
okay,
uh, that I could continue to go to. Um,
actually, I think we know the same people.
well, if it would have been Western Kansas, it would be Ron
Wait,
Christenberry.
no. It was I met him one time, but
Yes.
if you're talking about Texas,
Well, I was in the Panhandle, which was very, very
Oh, okay. So you guys were
north
you
Texas.
okay? So
Right.
wrong side of Texas.
Yeah. So, and then in Oklahoma, and again, either of these from where I lived in Texas, either one of these was just 30 minutes away. In Oklahoma, there was a father and son, Dr. Bill Shaw, who was a dentist, and his son, Bill Jr.
We're gonna have to have a
Yeah.
side conversation after
I
the
mean,
fact because
it's,
I'm
you
like,
know,
wait a
even then,
minute.
I
I
mean,
thought
the interesting about Dr. Shaw was anytime he was, he would do a seminar, anytime Oyata Sensei would come to Western Kansas, Dr. Shaw would examine his teeth for him. And he was his dentist as well as his student. So,
well, especially in like that time, I guess that kind of paid to have that be like, oh yeah, we're gonna have a seminar in Oklahoma. Why? Because I have this root canal that needs to be done.
yes, yes. So, and even, I guess I was like 2 hour drive from Amarillo, Texas, and there was a dojo there that I would go to occasionally as well. Excuse me. Um, but yeah, I studied with Sensei Christenberry for, I believe, about 3 years, up to the point where the first time I went to the Kansas City summer camp, and this would have been, I guess, 84, 85, and tested and received my Shodan. So
So you're
worked
really
through that.
part of like a lot of that OG crew that had initially
Yes.
started with go. I mean, not I don't want to say OG because it's like that goes way back to Okinawa,
Yeah.
um, but like if you're talking about that era of people who were going out to that stuff, that was like I don't want to fanboy out on my own podcast, but it's like that's like the era where like stuff was happening,
Yes.
um, and it was more kind of on the level.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there were. I mean,
Anyway, I don't
yeah.
want to draw too much attention because then I get a million people being like,
Yeah.
um, but I mean, cool. I actually didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. So, but I mean, like, yeah, like you said, I mean, I was kind of like the one-off of the inner circle. The guys who had been servicemen, or the guys who actually lived in the Kansas City area with Sensei. And but yeah, oh my gosh, yeah. It was like a round table of martial arts knowledge going on anytime people got together, talk shop, etc. Now, when at some point there, I kind of and this was, I mean, it was a reason outside of martial arts. Actually had a girl break my heart,
Oh
but
yeah.
I had a buddy who'd been from college who'd moved to the East Coast. He was living in New York, and he was like, "Hey, come out and see the big city." So just being 25 years old and stupid, I was like, "Okay, I'll just pick up and move to New York."
You're coming from Wichita, Kansas. So were you walking around like the streets with the cowboy hat and
No,
boots and
I was never that
chain?
cowboy. No, but I did drive a pickup truck. But yeah, and it was very interesting. I mean, he wasn't just in New York. I mean, oh my gosh, so we were so poor and scrabbling for a living. He was actually,
Just like people today.
yes, but I mean, he was renting the lower floor of a brownstone from another college friend, this fellow's mother, and we were right in the middle of the South Bronx in
Ooh.
in the mid '80s.
This was in the mid. So what was that more like? Kind of what we hear more of like the 70s New York, or is that more of like escape the Bronx type New York?
It was. You ever seen Fort Apache, the Bronx, the original?
I'm gonna have to now.
Yes, it was very much like that. I mean, there were blocks of rubble. There were like burned out cars on blocks. Um,
In New
crack
York?
cocaine. Huh?
In New This is a story I always hear about
This
people
is
when
the
they go to
Bronx.
LA. They see a dead body and they see a car on fire. But that's the first time I've ever heard that about New York.
Well, it was the Bronx. It's not
Right,
Manhattan. It's not.
right.
It's not Brooklyn or Queens. This is the South Bronx. This is the kind of place when people said, "Oh yeah, I would go to Yankee Stadium." You go there on the subway. You walk directly into the stadium. You get back on the subway. and you leave. You don't do anything around Yankee Stadium because it was a war zone back then.
Did Were people trying to make a revolution happen through gangs?
But there was, like I said, yeah, there was gang warfare. There was, muggings. There was, like I said, there was a lot of drugs at the time.
Could
I mean,
people dig it?
no, no, it was not. It was not glamorous. It wasn't a movie. Like I said, it was.
This
It was
podcast took a
interesting.
turn for me trying to reference old '80s movies, and you're just being like, dude, like that.
No, no, it was never that exciting. I mean, it's the amazing thing was that I never had any trouble there. I lived in the Bronx for about 6 months and escaped. Actually, my boss at work actually said, "You got to leave that place. You don't need to be there." But and yeah, that was definitely a sidetrack. The point being was that I knew that out on Long Island was Albert Giraldi and Jerry Sinise dojo.
Right.
I mean, it was Albert Giraldi's dojo at the time. Jerry was senior student and kind of the unofficial business manager for the dojo. They had space in a strip mall way out there in on Long Island, and since I did have a vehicle at the time, I was going out there. I'd go out there maybe once or twice a week in the evenings and every Saturday.
Was that the same place they got now, or was
No, my
that's a
gosh, no,
different
no,
location?
Jerry.
Yeah.
No, I was able to see Jerry's dojo about 10 years ago. It's beautiful now. Back
Yeah.
then, it was. I mean, it wasn't bad back then. If you, I mean, it was nice hardwood floor. There was a couple changing rooms in the back. Actually, interestingly enough, if you look at Jerry's YouTube channel,
Right.
his video for the Ekubo kata,
Oh, the one where
the
Mr.
one
Logue is
Jim
doing
Logue,
the yeah.
yeah, that is the Long Island dojo where Jim Logue is doing the Ekubo. So, and even my wife was like, "Is that the dojo?" And I was like, "Yeah, actually, now that you mention it, that's the old dojo I used to go to." So, yeah, so I trained with Sensei Giraldi and Jerry for, I guess, another 3 years, 4 years. I'm trying to think of it now. Um, After a couple of years, Sensei Giraldi said, "Okay, you're ready to go back out to Kansas City," and I tested for Nidon, and and that was, I guess, actually that was the same summer I just met my wife because we had just, and that's like starting the dating thing, and I was like, "Okay, I'm off to Kansas City for a week. I'll be back."
Yeah, because if you're in the East Coast going out to Kansas, somewhere like there, like you go out for a week.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, it was, and I continued to train. I sold my truck along the way, and it's like you live in New York, you don't really need a car
Right.
unless you want to go out to Long Island on a regular basis. Uh, so, so the logistics of that, it's like, I dropped the weeknight trips. I did go out on Saturday as much as I could, but it was like get up. It was one of the, yeah, get up at 5 a.m., take a subway to the Long Island Railroad. It would take 2 hours to get out there. And hopefully Jerry could meet me at the train station and give me a ride to the dojo so I didn't have to pay for a taxi.
So that was rocking for three years or so.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And like I said, and but again, like I said, it's like, my wife and I mean, we, our relationship developed. I proposed and we arranged our marriage, married in Brooklyn. Beautiful marriage, actually. If you've never seen it, we were actually married at the Japanese Gardens in the Brooklyn Botanical Garden.
Oh wow.
It's a beautiful setting if you go to their website and look at the pictures. And it was the first weekend in May. The cherry trees were in bloom. Um, it was gorgeous, gorgeous. Jerry was at our wedding too, as well. Good friend. Jerry and I became good friends over that time period. Um, but then, like I said, I mean, we reached a point where we decided, we were just discussing, do we want to start a family? If we do, how is that going to work? Do we want to stay in New York for that? and decided that really, even Brooklyn, which was, we lived in a nice neighborhood, but it was expensive. Um,
Right. I mean,
between the cost and just, the housing conditions and et cetera, we decided that leaving New York was the best first step.
Kurt Russell's right next door in the Bronx.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah. So we, my wife did the research on well, where did we want to go? We didn't want to get too far from the East Coast, and settled on Pittsburgh, which was billing itself as the most livable city in the country at the time. I mean, we both started a job search. I got the first job offer that was lucrative enough to support our move, and we picked up and took off for Pittsburgh. And that was my breaking. That was my step away from the martial arts. It was, you didn't have opportunities then to search out for, what's my network? Does anybody know?
Right.
You can't get on Facebook and say, hey, where's a dojo in Pittsburgh that anybody would recommend? And I mean, all you had then was basically a phone book, and maybe if you found a flyer on a bulletin board. I just immersed myself in the business of life at that
Right.
point. Marriage, career. We did start the family, had two beautiful children who are both adults now. Both of us went to grad school in the course of that time, and carried on for geez, almost 30 years. And when so it wasn't even really. I mean, in 2016, I was uh, I was starting a career search, a change in jobs,
Right.
and for many years, even if I was looking for work, we were pretty much anchored to Pittsburgh, getting our kids through. We didn't want to uproot our kids from our school system, and didn't want to take them away from out of an environment. My wife had been with a family that moved around a lot, and she's like, I don't want to do that. I want our kids to have that stability, that anchor.
Right.
But when the kids were adults, it was like, she's like, we don't have to stay in Pittsburgh after this. If you want to look for work nationwide, look for work. I got a job offer to return to the East Coast. It was Philadelphia, not New York. It was Philadelphia suburbs. And we picked up and moved again. It was a little more disruptive this time versus 30 years ago. We had 30 years worth of accumulated stuff
Right.
to deal with. But and a house to sell, all of that stuff. But so we got ourselves out here, and it still wasn't, a return to martial arts certainly wasn't high on my list of things to pursue once I got here. And it was only sheer dumb luck that I was actually finding my way to a doctor's appointment. My first time with a new physician in the area, and I drove by a sports complex, and I saw the Okinawan pinwheel, the
Right.
three-leafed symbol. I saw it on the sign. I said, "Wait a second! I know that sign. What the heck?" And this time, of course, I did get on Google and Googled for Okinawan karate and near me, and I found Sensei Teller. Walked into there. I kind of parked it for a couple of months. I was starting a new job and getting used to the area, and didn't. It wasn't the first thing I did.
Right.
But I did eventually walk in and introduced myself, and I was just like, okay, I studied with kind of like when we first met. I said, oh, yeah, I studied with Oyata, but it's been many, many years. Watched a class. They were actually just getting ready to have they had a big seminar then uh, that spring, 2017.
I was there. I was at that seminar. I
Were
wasn't.
you there? Jerry was there. I saw
I
Jerry for the first time in 10 years. And
was this
um,
2007?
I think it was 17. Might have been 16.
Well, 17 was when actually I know Jerry wasn't there, but
Okay.
it's 2018 one in the spring. Like it was like super snowy that one day, and they had like 18 people who were teaching at that one seminar.
It was a big turnout, and his
Yeah,
Sensei
Bat
Teller's
Mesa.
brother-in-law, Sensei
Yeah, yeah,
Nix,
yeah.
was there, and Sensei's wife did a performance of the dance, and so
I was there briefly. I left, and I
yeah.
came back. So I was like there for 2 hours, left in the snowstorm, came back 2 hours later at the end of the
Yeah.
seminar.
Yeah, I came in briefly to meet it and mostly to say hi to Jerry because I kind of like ambushed him. Surprise, Jerry, it's me. So, but yeah, so I started going to classes and pretty soon I was just wow, what was I thinking to be away for all this time? And even my wife remarked, she's like your mood is elevated so much now that you've gone back to this. It's like keep doing it. So yeah, so I mean she supports me in it and I've been back for going on 2 years now, and there I am going to seminars, like I said, when I can, and
Right.
training as much as I can, and working with the. I mean, they have, the Sensei Teller is there. The I don't know. We say Fred. Fred runs the dojo now. Levi is the other senior black belt, and they're both very, very knowledgeable, and I just,
Both
I'm
very
just
good guys. They.
yes,
I
great
remember
guys. Yes, they all.
I watched it there, and they were like, they were just treated me like I'd been there for the last 10 years, and just very, very friendly with me.
Yes,
And so those two gentlemen you just mentioned, and also including Mr. Teller, um, they couldn't have been nicer people. Um,
yes, yes. I mean,
so
sometimes you go into a place and you just, when you get attitude from, the people in charge immediately, you just want to like, no, just, turn around, walk back out. But no, they are always open, and it's, if you demonstrate your willingness to work hard and listen, they just share everything. So no. Like I said, no regret. I mean, my regret is that I waited. Why couldn't I have found something like this sooner? But
well, it's a difficult thing when you're moving around and you need to move to the most livable city in the world. Apparently, my family had a similar thing. We I had a large group. My family had a large group of people living in the Philadelphia area, and then was one day like the family of like nine just like up and went like we're going to Pittsburgh, bye, and so it was like a lot of people were just like, all right, have
yeah,
fun. Um, I think what you've just described and what like and thank you so much for describing it like showcasing your your journey as a martial artist, both in and out. I think that describes a lot of what people have gone through. I haven't ever had that period of just like being gone for those X number of years. I'd always kind of touched, even if in my most touch and go days, I was still training at least like once a week. So, I mean, there's not to pat myself on the back about that.
yeah,
But, but it gets in some people's blood in some ways and it gets in others in a different way. And
right.
so, I mean, you said it really, really eloquently. It's just the business of life. And what do you think that people who would think they would hear that and say like, well, that's just an excuse, X, Y, and Z. Training is training. As to
Well, I
play
mean,
devil's advocate, I'm not saying that,
sure,
but
sure. Well, I guess my response to that is, I mean, the business of life is about choices,
right,
and you've made your choice of focusing on training. I made my choice to, at the time, focus on family. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I don't mean to imply that. I certainly don't want any hate mail over that sentiment. I think now, like I said, if I had to do it all over again, I wish I had looked for a better balance of it and not walked away from it.
right,
I mean, there were certainly times when I think, wow, I mean, it would have been hard to find time for martial arts in everything else that was going on.
right.
I mean, there
Two
were
kid, two
two
kids, and
kids, and I mean, kids for the last 30 or 40 years. It's really, with all of the activities they offer. I mean, both my kids were in soccer. My daughter did marching band through all of her school career. I got hoodwinked into. I was actually president of our little local soccer program for a couple of years. It was,
you
it
don't
was
get
one of.
hoodwinked into that. You just go along with it.
Yeah,
Someone just
no,
comes up
I
behind
tell
like for a few
people.
years doing this.
Yeah, no, I tell people it was literally like that old gag in the movies of like, does anybody want to volunteer to be president? And everybody behind me took 2 steps back, and I wound up being president for a couple. But it was rewarding to do it. It was very satisfying.
if you had decided to sacrifice that to be like, well, there's this dojo down the street, so
Yeah,
have fun biking
yeah.
in the streets, kids.
Yeah, no, I can't go to the board meeting because I have to train, or I can't work the concession stand on Saturday because I'm going to a seminar. It's like, yeah, no, it's yeah, so that's a choice. It's I mean, with the years when I went to grad school
Yeah, that knocks
when
you out.
my kids were, they weren't in school yet and they weren't to the age of doing activities. They were like under the age of 5. But that's
At
small
the age of
kids in the
5 kids
house,
plus
and
grad school.
working full time and going to
Yeah,
school part time was just like insane. I mean, I had days when I was, and it was a technical degree. I had days when I worked in IT. I would program all day and go home and program till 3 in the morning on homework. And oh my God,
plus kids.
I had carpal tunnel so bad I could barely open my hands. But so I think some of it is now, you know, what I appreciate now is like I've kind of I'm kind of moving into my golden years, so to speak. But what that's given me in that sense is that, I do have more time slots to pursue a few more things and be selfish about it than I had been at that time, I think is the way to say it.
No, and
And
I can attest to that's that's the noblest thing. I think like that's no one can ever take that from you. No one could ever say continue like the devil as advocate I was just playing. No one could ever down talk that.
yeah,
Um,
I mean, I mean, I see even now, I mean, there are guys at the dojo now who are like, I can't come to class tonight because the kids got something for school, or my wife's got a cold or something. And I will never disparage anybody for
right,
making those kind of choices. So, but
right,
when you're there, show up and train, and that's all anybody can do.
yeah. And I
So,
think that's what do you think gave you like bit that itch. Like, did you ever feel over the years, kind of in the absence of training, kind of like the itch to get back into training, but obviously career, kids, family life, going back to school and stuff like that. But
yeah.
what do you think
Well,
that itch that kind of because for me, at the very least, I like it's a part of my daily routine that
right.
I can't be sane without doing karate to a degree. Um, that's just me. But I mean, everyone's kind of programmed different. But where does the itch kind of go? Does it just kind of fade away, or does it always just kind of pop up randomly? Or
Um, I, I think, I mean, for me, my, that itch manifested as, the desire to do something physical. So there, I mean, it wasn't like I was a slug the entire 30 years that I lived in Pittsburgh. I always had something that I pursued. I went through my mountain bike phase. I went back to something my father had taught me as a child. As and even now I carry it through. I'm very passionate about fly fishing. I've always liked to, I can go down to the gym and just sweat for an hour. So in
right,
that sense, in that sense, all those years, martial arts was just another physical activity to me. And it's only been recently that I come to realize. And I was talking to somebody last year, and I said, there's only two things I do now that and I say take me out of my head. And that is, it's like everything that I'm worried about, everything I'm focused on at work, anything problems like the car needs a brake job, whatever.
right.
There's two things where all of that stuff just totally goes away, and that's the martial arts and when I'm out on a trout stream fly fishing. You're so laser focused, then it's a meditation. It really is a
Yeah,
form. Either one's a form of meditation. And now I appreciate the mental health side of that as well as the physical.
that doesn't get talked about enough,
Yeah.
for sure.
No, I mean it's and people have different things about their training that they want to do. I mean, you get some of the young, like even the junior black belts. It's like if and sometimes they open it up. If one of the teachers says, "What do you want to do this class?" The first thing they say is spar. the first thing I say is kata. And that's my meditation. I mean, I could easily do kata for an hour and just feel totally refreshed at the end of it, because everything, all of the mental sewage gets flushed out in that time.
Which is it? That's an interesting way of put. I mean, mental sewage going by. But no, it's a good way of putting it, because I mean that is the one thing I think that like people kind of downplay about kata, and in karate training, in traditional martial arts training in general, where it's like doing sparring drills or doing bag work or doing even just trying to do like a match all out. You're not really building anything. You're building maybe yourself up, or maybe you're like getting some form of like calisthenic training in, but it's not, there's not that feeling of going from point A to point Z and having like built up something along the way. And maybe that's an odd way to put it, but
yeah, I kind of understand where you're going with it, which is, I mean, kata to me is not, its main point isn't physical conditioning. Definitely. I mean, there's a certain amount of, if you're doing your horse stance correctly, you're building some leg strength. If you're emphasizing your block, and your arm position, there's a certain amount of mechanical to it. But to me, kata to me is a very inward focused on, is my technique correct? And that extension is not only is technique correct, but if I had to apply this move in real life, in a life protection situation, am I doing the technique correctly to apply that? And the other part is like, okay, I've got this technique. How would I apply this? So, I mean, that's the thing I get very excited about learning. And that's probably one of the things, that's the part where I'm trying to make up a lot of ground for what I missed in the last 30 years is turning the formalized process into an applicable process. Not that I want to go out in the street and kick somebody's butt, but
you were in the Bronx in the 80s, man. You had all the opportunities.
I know. I could have walked down to the, instead of walking down to the corner and sharing a 40 in a paper bag, I could have gone down there and just whipped through the crowd, but I didn't. No, that's another story. Misspent youth. But
well, it also makes me think, it's like, why was the Bronx so violent? And like, this is actually just a kind of odd repercussion of technology. It's actually just a bunch of people getting up in 80s garb in time traveling back to that time to more dangerous places where you couldn't actually trace DNA and stuff, and practicing their martial arts.
Well, that was, and I heard somebody say this the other night too, was, somebody Oyata asked somebody, he said, what do you want to get out of this? And the guy said, I want to learn how to fight. And he said, if you want to learn how to fight, just go down to a bar and fight somebody. But then I'd also heard that's kind of like when he was a young man on Okinawa, it's like that circle of guys there, this might be urban legend, but a lot of times that was part of their training, was like they would just go down and cause some trouble somewhere and practice the extension of their art. And
I can neither confirm nor deny any of these stories.
Like I said, urban myth that I know.
It sounds a little Fight Clubby. To say the least. Yeah. But I can neither confirm nor deny evidence of this. Seeing that I live very close to the island in question.
That would be an interesting. You kind of think about the extension of it as Okinawa post World War II was probably a pretty rough neighborhood. So
the rough neighborhood of Okinawa.
Yes.
Again, I can neither confirm nor deny.
No, me either. I'm speculating. Don't anybody quote me, and don't anybody come after me for it.
I think it's well, and the other big thing is too that the times have really changed on that, and that has a lot to do with what was going on there at the time, and Okinawa wasn't Okinawa. It wasn't really Japan. It
Hmm.
was not like it didn't really belong anywhere, and so this led into a lot of frustrations. So I'm not confirming nor denying like what exactly happened, but I've heard those stories too.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, it would be interesting if somebody could like kind of timeline a history of those years.
the thing is, there is historiography done around that time, because during that time they couldn't do any reporting actually.
Mm,
But and it's kind of going in a different direction. But like
yeah.
it's there. It's just some of it's not in English. Some of it's very academic and put on the back burner. So I would venture to reckon that would make for an excellent project, to kind of
Mm,
put up and kind of more in the context of what we're talking about as martial arts and how that
yeah.
that got transmitted. But you have to be also respectful of the people who are involved, because you have to think in terms of generationally. Like
Hmm.
Mr. Oyata died about 7 8 years back. His kids are in their kind of their mid 40s, like 50s at this point, or I want to say like mid 30s,
Hmm.
early 40s. They have grandkids and stuff, so it's like, look, Grandpa was a violent like you don't want to
No,
start
I don't think that was the
put that
case
out.
at all. I mean,
So you can't name names, but it's not without merit, that conversation. But
yeah,
that's an
and
interesting digression down that point.
yeah, yeah, we kind of sidetracked there, and if,
No, it's all good.
but I mean, just to close that circle, I guess it's I never. I never studied the martial arts. I never started at the martial arts with the intention of saying, okay, I just want to be a total tough guy and be able to go out and kick somebody's whatever. That was never my intention. That's like, and that's not that's not why I practice. I mean, my approach to practicing the martial arts is that it's my fervent hope that I never use it in a
Right,
real situation. I mean, that's my final on that subject.
right. I think that's a lot of what a lot of us don't want.
Right.
Um, and I think probably it's actually Jerry who said this to me, that it wasn't a lot of people were okay with fighting, and but the implicit understanding of that sentiment was kind of there. But it wasn't until like that around that 80s time when people started like saying that and making that kind of a sentimentality did that start coming out more on Front Street for people. But I think that's what a lot of people. I full-heartedly agree with you. That's not why a lot of us. That's not what any of us kind of want to do. But there's enough.
Yeah.
There's enough meat from here to here with enough people. Then they go do other things where it all just becomes meat in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not. I mean, we're not warriors. We're not in the military. We have no legitimate excuse to act out on our training. It should be an internalized achievement, not externalized. Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect.
So,
To kind of bring us back to center in this way. Um, if you kind of talk to other people who might be in kind of a similar party or situation who had a long time ago had done martial arts, and then they're thinking of maybe going back to it, but they think, oh well, that was 20 years ago, I can't do that type of stuff anymore, or like that was when I was a kid, I can't, that stuff's really not for me, maybe I'll do some tai chi, or maybe I'll do some pilates. um, what would you say to them?
um, well, I certainly I can appreciate the hesitation. Um, like I said, I've always been someone who doesn't shy away from physical activity, but even coming back to this, I mean, I've certainly realized that I can't do some of the things I did 30 years ago when I was in my 20s. Some of the flexibilities definitely reduced. I've got the various age acquired arthritis in my low back. I'm dealing right this month I'm dealing with bursitis in my shoulder. And it's just like, what's that? Yeah, what's that about? So, but but I think something that's always been true, something I would have said even when I was in my 20s, is that you take the techniques that you can do and make them work for you. You know what I mean? Unless you're, I mean, I don't know if there's any excuse. It's kind of like the Black Knight in Monty Python. Come back here and I'll bite you. No arms and no legs, but there's still something that works. So if you really want to do it, like I said, it's the only thing that kept me out for 30 years was me. Was in my, it's my choices.
Right.
There was nothing physical to that side of it that was an applicable excuse. So I don't, if somebody says, "Oh, I'm too old for that now," I'm just like, you know, you could do kata. Anybody could do kata. Yeah, even if your stances aren't as deep as they used to be, mine aren't. Uh,
They
even
don't
if
need to
you're,
be.
yeah, even if you're a little off balance sometimes when you turn around, I do, but I keep working on it. So
Yeah, and I mean that's the ultimate thing of it, right? Like it it it's weird for me to think like because for me it has not been 30 years. I like to say I'm close to 20, but it's hard for me to think in like 10 more years or maybe even 15 more years. Um, kind of like what the difference would really have been from the time I had started 20 years ago. And you know, it also goes to show how well humans are at readapting, right?
mhm.
Because you had muscle memory at one point, which I think is like, I guess maybe one way to cap off is like saying like, when you first got back on the horse, how much did you notice was still there? How much did you notice was missing? Maybe like memory was, but how much did you notice was like really, oh yeah, nope, this is that.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, a lot of the basics were mostly there. My stances weren't too bad. I mean, some of the things that I correct now working with Fred and Levi is things have evolved since I was out for 30 years. Some of the hand positions have changed. Maybe the difference in how you cover for a block has changed. Even some of the, so, I mean, kata has changed, a little bit. They'll
Yeah,
say, "Oh no, you should do it this way," and I say, "Well, because I still do it the way I learned it 30 years ago." I'm like, "Well, that's how I remember it," and it's kind of like, well, okay, let's talk through why it changed, and it's like, oh, that makes sense. So I start working on it, and I think the hardest part is to breaking that muscle memory for the things that have evolved from when I first learned them. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. I mean, day one when I walked into the dojo, I could still do Nahanchi Shodan, even though I hadn't done it in years. But I mean, I practiced that so many times uh, back then. It was like, okay, yeah, that one's pretty much imprinted on me. I mean, when we'd go to summer camp in Kansas City, everybody tested for black belt did Nahanchi Shodan. Didn't matter what level you were testing for and how many times you'd done it. I did Nahanchi Shodan twice on tests, each time, and hopefully you improved between. But that's all a sensei asked was
right.
Nahanchi Shodan.
And you're just drilling and drilling and like that. I think
Yes.
it's funny because I joked with actually Fred about this, where they were talking about doing a form with the kata, and I think it was actually Mr. Teller who asked him, was like, "Do you remember that?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, I do," because for the test, I'm like, trauma.
Yeah.
As muscle memory, that's trauma.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not to joke about trauma, but I mean,
Yeah.
especially when you like test in that kind of crowd, it's like if you kind of scared into it,
Oh
um,
yeah.
to a degree.
Oh yeah. Especially, I mean, I'm thinking that I remember, that the higher ranks and the senior students tested first. So if I'm in a room with 50 other guys, there are 40 guys are going to test in front of me. So I have the whole time to sweat over it until it's my turn, and and just like, wow, okay. but somehow it's, you get up there and it's like, I mean, kata is I mean, they're so short. It's like, you hardly have time to think about it and you're done. And then,
Yeah.
and then everything's okay.
I think that's a good way of ending it, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So Larry, as I asked everyone, like so this week, I guess we're recording on a Monday, so this
Mhm.
works out. This week, what are kind of like what's your goal in terms of training?
Well,
I know
I've
you got the
started.
bursitis in your shoulder, so I mean that's
Yeah. Yeah. Fortunately, that training does, I mean, kata obviously doesn't impact that too much. Some of the, the Yakusoko Kumite, anything that involves a push motion, like doing push up, anything that involves holding my arm rigid while somebody strikes it, that's hard.
right.
But I've been doing kata. I've been working on getting back to my, working through the black belt katas, Pasai, Kusanku, and Nisei-shi. So I just started working on Nisei-shi this past week. So I'll continue to work on that. And
It's the shortest one.
I might say Pinan Godan, but yes. The black belt katas is definitely the shortest one.
Yeah, well, it's also I because Godon has one. Nisei-shi is the most even
Yes. Yes,
of I think of all of them.
right.
Godon is not because it's very specifically down on one specific knee.
Yes, and I find actually, I mean, that's one of the things in Godon and some of the others is getting down on one knee and getting back up doesn't go so well as it used to. But
Yeah, I remember having to actually tell people who are I guess more senior than me is like they really try to do like those movements and they try to do them hard and because they want to do them for testing or whatever. I'm like, dude, save it for when you're on the street. Like
mhm.
we get it. Knee's bad. You don't need to go that hard on it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's yeah. If you hurt yourself in training, you've just delayed your training. So
Yeah, I've had a little bit of that not lately, but about a month ago, had a small ligament tear in my leg. So
ugh.
yeah, it was annoying because it was just really because it was like really like yeah, I'm back into training, back running, and
Yeah,
small little ligament tear.
yeah.
Kind of takes
Come
it.
back in 20 years and we'll swap old guy stories. So
I was back on my feet in a week, so I
yeah,
mean, pretty happy about that. So I can't complain.
yeah. No, that's
So,
good. That's good.
cool, cool.
There is one thing I wanted to say out loud because I'm
Sure.
very proud of this. It's like a little anecdote, and it relates to directly to my interactions with Master Oyata. I had the opportunity to probably see him a dozen times or so over the course of my early career. But one of the first times I was in Master Oyata's presence, and I can't remember why. Somehow he said, he looked at me, he goes, "You got a car?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Let's go get lunch." And we went to a little noodle shop, and Master Oyata taught me how to use chopsticks. And
Yeah,
that's one of my most memorable moments.
I think that's it. That's like the best we can leave on because wow.
Yeah, I mean, I was, like I said, I was a hick from the Midwest. I was like, I barely knew which end to hold. And
Well,
he's like,
especially
"Okay,
that time, it was not common for folks from where we're from to know how to do that.
oh yeah, no, no,
Nowadays, it's a little more, people are a little more global minded, but I
right,
mean,
yeah,
and to
no,
learn
there,
that from a guy from yeah, everyone kind of puts him on the pedestal, but I mean that human moment.
mhm. I was just gonna say, just a little thing that's,
Sure.
a memory to hold on to.
No, that's I mean, yeah. I don't like my react. Obviously, on audio, my reactions kind of doesn't come through, but I can imagine that being something else. Like you can't, nothing replaces those times.
Yeah,
Cool. Well,
good
Larry,
stuff.
yeah, thank you so much for telling your story, and thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Oh yeah, no, it's been a great chat. I mean, going into this, I was kind of thinking, well, what do I have to offer that will fill a whole hour? But yeah, we've talked it away. So
I I'll mention this another time, but I've had people complain that it's an hour, and so
Mhm.
I'm actually trying to push for it to be more like 2 hours at some point. Just be like, you know what? If you want
Wow.
to complain about it, I'm going to make this really hard for you then.
Yeah,
All right,
good
sir.
stuff.
Well, thank you so
Thank you.
much, and
Hmm.
everybody, thanks for listening, and don't forget to keep on training.